Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. My name is Jack Alatesh, and today we're going to take a look at Tom Clancy's The Division Open Beta. I played this beta recently, and wanted to just put my impressions of it out there. For those less familiar with this game, it's not a common genre. It blends first-person shooter and RPG, or in this case, third-person shooter and RPG. The end result, though, is that you've got skill trees, you've got perks, you've got lots of guns, and you have to use your input method in order to put the put the crosshairs on what you'd like to shoot and then shoot it. The game itself takes place in New York City in winter. There's a virus which was released, caused a whole heck of a lot of casualties, and the Division, of which your main character is a portion of, is part of a joint task force trying to restore order and retake the city. The understanding here is that they were activated when the virus thing occurred, and now they're out wiping stuff out. The beta was not terribly concise on exactly what this whole The Division thing means, joint task force or anything else, partially because it was fairly short on story. So looking at what this game does, it's somewhat unique to this particular instance. It's a blend of a realistic shooter genre and an actual RPG, as we've discussed. There are some real-time tactics, as it's a cover-based shooter. You dive behind stuff, pop your head out, and take pot shots at the other guys, or just kind of hold your weapon around there and spray ammo all over the place. Anyhow, pretty decent time. There's also some long-term development objectives, seeing as you recover your base, you get your technicians, and you work missions to rebuild your base. So it also blends a PvE and PvP and has a fairly decent backstory for doing this. So you got the light zone, which is lawful, you can't shoot other players. Then you have the dark zone, in which there's martial law. And the important thing about martial law is if you aggress another player aggresses you without any cause to do so, they're then marked as a bad guy. They show up on folks' mini-maps and they can be taken down, and whoever brought them down can get themselves a bounty on it. The dark zone is obviously incentivized. They do this through better loot, and that feeds directly into the crafting system. So really I think that it has some fairly unique bits and pieces to bring to the table. Now looking at the beta itself, this beta was more complete than the closed betas. There were still some things missing, but most of the skill trees were grayed out. You still couldn't unlock one particular wing of the base, and that's not really a problem at all. I also encountered some bugs while I was messing around in the dark zone. So when shooting folks in the dark zone, I didn't get flagged for aggressing on someone else, and they didn't get flagged for aggressing on me. No big deal. It's probably just a beta issue. There's plenty of information out there, like say on YouTube, where one can see how this aggression mechanic works. So with the Dark Zone during beta and during the times that I was able to play, there were not a whole lot of players on. I didn't see many of them. Spent, 30-45 minutes running around the Dark Zone shooting at stuff. So one thing I want to point out though, is with anything PvP, generally fewer players in an area equals a worse experience or a much more poor experience. However, I don't expect this to persist in a release. There's going to be an initial noob rush when everybody charges in there and starts shooting everybody for no reason. But that'll all work itself out. Now, my general impression of the game is that the game itself feels good. The mechanics feel good. The storyline feels good. The voices and the characters appear compelling, at least as far as we were allowed to see them, and allowed to see them progress. The game performed well on my box here. I'm running a GTX 970 for video. There are moderate performance hitches, most likely due to loading in new content, loading in chunks of the city. Now, most of the city was off limits, but the portion that we could get to looked to be fairly well New York. I'm very interested to see exactly how much city we're allowed to charge through and how much of that is occupied by the Dark Zone. Based on the map in the beta, it doesn't look like the Dark Zone is a substantial amount of area. It looks like it's a fairly small area. And the story does in some ways prop that up by stating that there's a small area where the infection is worse. Once again, looking forward to seeing this. The combat itself, I felt, had a very solid feel. The feel of the mouse, the feel of interacting with the weapons, is fairly similar to a proper shooter, which is great. The cover system has a few hitches and has a little bit of weirdness every now and again, but it works well enough. I would expect between beta and it actually releasing for them to rectify some of the issues, perhaps slap some polish on it. Now, one thing that I will note about combat is that the NPCs really feel like bullet sponges. And this is because it's an RPG. There are levels involved. So if I'm level 4 and that bad guy with a flamethrower is level 12, it's going to take me a lot of ammo to bring him down, even if I shoot him directly between the eyes. Just part of the genre. What I like about this game so far is the premise and the storyline. I'm not a big fan of zombie games, but I do like these kind of, gritty modern day, hey, this could potentially in some not quite entirely dystopian future come to pass. I also like the genre blending. I like the idea that there's a shooter that has some progression aside from what can I shoot next. And yeah, obviously without all the unlocks that come with the modern shooter genre, you know, the Call of Duty and the Battlefield installments that come around every year. I like the gunplay feel and the responsiveness of the weapons, the interfaces, and the UI. Basically, there was none of the poor mouse behavior that us PC folks typically will see when a game is also produced or produced in the first place for a console. It's not to say that this was produced in the first place for a console, however they are pushing it on a console, and sometimes the controls on the PC just become awful. The other thing I enjoy is that player skill will matter to some degree. This is especially true in the Dark Zone. So as far as wait and see items are concerned, if the story delivers as well as it starts out, I'll be a pretty happy man. We'll wait and see on that one. One thing that I found missing from the game, and this is kind of purely a mechanical, gripe, is that there was no FOV slider. Now I understand, as we discussed, it was produced on console as well, but that doesn't mean you should lock the FOV for us PC folks. That being said, I do not know whether or not the console players and the PC players will be released into the same Dark Zone. If they do, it's going to kind of be messy, but that could be a potential reason to leave an FOV slider or field of view slider out of the PC release. One of the things I'm waiting to see is, okay, so this is published by Ubisoft. Ubisoft has this great way of putting out games that have no clue how to do anything rational in any respect to the mouse. Like you take Far Cry, the most recent Far Cry to pop out, 4, not Primal. You take a look at that one, there's negative acceleration applied to the mouse. It makes it feel like you're trying to scoot your cursor across the screen with a frickin' sponge. It is ridiculous. And yeah, just because this was a beta and it all worked well doesn't mean it's going to release and continue to all work well. The wait and see also extends to the Dark Zone. It'll be interesting to see how that develops and what ends up happening when somebody discovers some way to break these aggro mechanics or some super awesome secret hiding sniping spot where it doesn't matter if you're flagged or not because nobody can get to you before the timer expires on your head. Also in the wait and see category, I'm going to have to point out the performance hitches. I would expect that those are rather called by the time it releases. But if they're not, it's nothing more than just a simple jerk. You wouldn't necessarily notice it. So the big question here is, should you buy on release? Now first off, you notice I didn't say pre-order. Pre-ordering is a bad idea. It results in bad things, and yeah, it's all around. Just don't do it. Anyhow, should you buy on release? I'd wait for the player reviews before committing to buy this thing on a PC. They're commanding AAA money for it, and it's published by Ubisoft. Most folks, myself included, have been burned at least twice by Ubisoft titles and their PC releases. So in some cases they fix them, in some cases they can be fixed immediately, in other cases they're just not all that fixable. And as we've seen from Arkham Knight this last year, when it goes bad for the PC release, it's just pretty much bad all the way around. As far as you folks on the console, I would have a look at it. I would buy carefully on release. I would kind of have an idea, take a look at the folks that will get a media key or a press key for this game and publish a review of it a couple days before it releases, and at that point make your purchasing decision. Now the reason for the difference in advice here is because if you happen to be buying on a console, there's a higher chance of getting your money back if the game sucks or if it's awful. But yeah, jump on, read those reviews, and have a look. So in conclusion, I think this game and the premise behind it is a good idea. It's a great blend of game types, and the PC version feels pretty much scared away. Now my prediction is that this one's going to be pretty well hit or miss. Either it's going to go real well, there'll be a lot of players, and it will be very, very well liked and adored within the PC and RPG community, or it'll be a straight up miss and it will fall between the cracks of genre and never be heard from again. So it really depends a lot, in my opinion, on the end game. What's there to do following the main storyline? Once I build my base and I've got all my stuff and I'm like, okay, this is awesome, I've crafted everything on the planet, what is there going to be to do? Will there be end game content? No clue. And that's where we'll close. Thank you for joining me, and if I missed anything specific, please feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to keep an eye out for it should they do an open beta again. As always, thanks for watching, and enjoy yourself.